Hey, how can we share decision making in a participatory research project?
So, as you probably know, shared decision making is central to most participatory research approaches. Really, the only place where you're not going to be using shared decision making is in a purely advisory model. And as I've said over and over again, I'd highly recommend against that if at all possible. Even in advisory models, you still might be able to bring in some shared decision making for smaller bits of the project. As much as shared decision making is important, it also comes with its challenges, especially given different communication styles or power imbalances. I think some of us who are privileged to have fairly easy time communicating, and those of us who have a lot of power sometimes don't even notice or see how difficult it is for other people to really truly share in decision making or share power. It's again, I always think I'm so nice and I always think I'm so approachable. And when it comes down to it, if you don't do things to actively make shared decision making happen, it won't be as shared as you might think it is. Some decisions are purely made by team leaders. You can't have everybody on the team and participate in every different decision. That's okay, but this is where it's important to have some community representatives on your leadership team. Many decisions, especially the most important ones, though, should still be made by the full team whenever possible. Point is, as I've said over and over again, to be transparent. Be transparent about which decisions are made by which team members and where it is that you want people to be actually making shared decisions, where in fact they don't have a say in a decision. Don't pretend that they do. So this is where voting simply doesn't work. We sometimes think about, okay, like what are we going to do? We're going to have a meeting. We're going to take a vote in the meeting. Save that for the Senate. That's not what you do in a small team, because individual people are there to contribute their particular expertise. What are we going to do? Are we going to, the majority thinks we should do it this way and the statistician says that's wrong? Does that mean that the statistician gets voted out because they're in the minority? No, they're there because they're the statistician. We need to make sure that we're doing something that is statistically appropriate. In the same regard, that works with community partners too. Even if most community partners might agree with something, the reason we have diverse teams is because people are bringing in their particular lived experience. So if this works for most of your partners, but your partners with an intellectual disability don't think it's going to work, majority doesn't count. Same thing if your partner who's a person of color thinks that this is offensive. It doesn't matter what the majority thinks. Ignoring the objection from a minority or even a single person may have terrible consequences in a research project. So a formal consensus process can really help. You don't have to use a formal consensus process, but I find that it really, really makes things easier. First, it makes sure everyone has a say. We think that everybody's contributed, and sometimes we realize that people were quiet and actually didn't agree all along. It also helps clarify what the decision even is. I've been in plenty of meetings where we think we've all come to a decision, and because we just kind of let the conversation go the way the conversation went, we thought we were deciding something, and actually people had very different ideas of what it is. It also encourages creative solutions to problems. And ironically, even though we're trying to reach full consensus, which takes time, it actually speeds up the process because sometimes people just kind of like to talk when in fact everybody's already agreeing. So it's kind of nice to be able to say, oh, more discussion isn't necessary. We're all on the same page. Let's go. And it does make you take more time when in fact discussion really is needed. Again, I've been using consensus processes far longer than I've been working in autism research, and I really can't stress how useful they are. They help build and maintain trust. At the same time, they're not perfect, and they may be very hard to use if there's active mistrust or animosity. The point of the consensus process is that you're basically assuming that we all actually have the same ultimate goal in mind. I would not use this consensus process in the US Senate. That's where, in fact, you do need to vote, because you have to be able to trust that you're going to get there, that you're going to be able to reach a consensus, and that people really have the good of the project and the goals at their hearts when they're working together. So there are so many consensus processes out there, and we didn't come up with this one. This is just the one we've used now for the past 16 years. We find it really, really helpful. We call it our 5-finger process. As a reminder, this is not a vote, it's a process. So what we do is we have a discussion. No reason to start with consensus when you haven't even talked about it. Once we've gotten to the point in the discussion where it seems like there's a good idea that people are kind of coalescing at, or seems like they're agreeing with, that's when somebody says, okay, maybe it's time to have a finger count. They spell out what the actual proposal is, both verbally and in our meetings, also in chat. So we're very clear what it is that we are agreeing on. And then we call for fingers. 1 is I love it. 2, I can't see them here. 2 is I'm fine with it. 3 is I have more questions or need more discussion. And then the person should say what the questions are or what the discussion is. 4 is I don't like it, but I won't block it, and why it is they don't like it. 5 is I dislike it so much I can't live with it. I'll block it. No. And again, why? The first time around, if anyone has given a 3, 4, or 5, they explain why, and we talk about it again. We generate new ideas. We come up with new ideas. Once we've figured out how to address it, we go ahead and call for fingers again. On the second and further times around, if somebody gives it a 4, it's okay. It can pass with a 4. Because that's the whole point, is they can say that they don't like it, but they're not going to block it. So we'll repeat the process, really coming up with some other thing until everybody gives the idea a 1, a 2, or a 4. This may sound like, again, why would we let one person block an entire thing? Again, because making sure that we've addressed one person's issues is really important. Other people say, oh, I don't like this idea of moving ahead, even if it's a 4. Truth is, we hardly ever, in thousands of times of using this process over the past 2 decades, have we actually ended up with people giving it a 4 and moving ahead. But sometimes it's easier for people to say something's a 4 and explain why they disagree with it than to feel like they're blocking it. So that first time around, having that option of giving it a 4 really, I think, allows people to give dissent even when it's more minor dissent. I'll give an example from a time that it's kind of a meta example, but I love this. Back in the beginning of our partnering project about violence against people with developmental disabilities, we used the consensus process as an example to decide whether we're going to use the consensus process. So we just kind of did it in this meta way, and we talked about it. And I thought, well, of course, who's going to say no? Everybody sounded like they agreed with it. People asked questions. I thought we had a consensus. I called for fingers, and one person who'd been completely quiet during this time put up 4 fingers. And we asked her why the 4 fingers. And she explained, she was somebody with an intellectual disability. She explained that she found it to be very childish to be putting up fingers. Now, this is something where, as somebody who's privileged enough never to have been infantilized, it never would have occurred to me. But for somebody who's been infantilized their whole life and now is in their 60s, doing something that feels childish may be a problem. So that was the type of thing that's very easy to fix. Well, instead of putting up fingers, we can just say the numbers. Or those were in-person meetings, say the numbers. In our meetings now, type the numbers. That's the type of thing that, had we voted, we never would have even known that this was something that was upsetting her. It wouldn't have upset her enough to necessarily say something, but why do that when it's something that's easy to fix? And many times we can fix something because of something somebody's brought up at the time of a thinker count. Again, I highly recommend using this. You can download a picture of the process and more instructions from our website. Bottom line, shared decision-making is really important. Be really transparent about where you are making shared decisions and where you're not. Voting doesn't tend to work in this type of context. Formal consensus processes can be very helpful. They're not the answer to everything, but they're definitely worth trying. Next up, we'll have ways to make team email messages more accessible. Thanks again to the full Aspire team and to AARP.